Hey everybody, this is Al. What? Anna, you're saying something already.
I'm saying let's do it. Let's go.
Oh my goodness, she's ready.
Late.
Anna Strong is ready.
I'm so ready.
Hi everybody, this is Al. I'm in Philadelphia, and we have Zach Gardner and Chris Martin doing the tech as usual. Although Zach seems to be a novice on the audio today, because can I tell them the secret? Next week, at next week's Webcast, Zach Gardner will be flying solo because Chris Martin is doing something else. So we're nervous about that, but not too nervous because Zach is learning on the audio today. Anyway, there's Zach. Say hi, Zach. Too late. You switched out. Okay, good. All right, and we have Mary sitting to my right and Julia just to my left and Lily. Hello, everybody. Hi. And Anna Strong is at the phone. And Jason is here with the portable mic. And Jason will have the portable mic the entire time because it's just Jason today, so that's really cool. And we have in the Hangouts we have Angie. Hello, Angie. Can you unmute and say hello?
Hi, everybody. Hey,
Angie. Good to see you. And we have Dave Poplar. Hello, Dave.
Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon, gentlemen. We have Erica Kaufman. Hello, Erica.
Hi, Al.
Hey, you know what I did this morning, Erica?
What?
I bought 2 copies of one of your books, and I'm going to give them away next week at the Webcast because I really, really love your poetry. And I don't know why I didn't think of this sooner. And Max McKenna in Chicago. Hello, Max.
Good morning, Al.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great, I'm fine. Running a little fast today.
It's still morning for Max.
It's still morning for Max. And Molly O'Neill in sunny Southern California. Hello,
Yes, good morning.
Hey, I wish I was there. It's kind of dim and November-y here. Well, we're going to have some fun today talking about... Oh, and Jason. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Al.
Hey, how are you?
Pretty good.
You're looking good today. Rocking the flannel.
Exactly.
Like Anna. Okay, we're going to go right to Anna Strong, who's going to tell us about some meetups. If you're in these vicinities, please get in your car, train, plane, get there. Anna,
yes,
quickly
please take your plane.
Tell people about meetups. Go ahead.
Well, it's awesome. I mean, we're coming down to sort of the final stretch of the class, which I cannot believe that we're already down to like a week and a half left. But the meetup calendar is full of awesome happenings. Actually, today we have the Berkeley group is meeting up at Cafe Lila. The Philly meetup group is actually going to be meeting later this evening over there at 1920 Commons, which is
on Penn's campus.
Yeah, right across the way.
Yep.
Tomorrow, the Mountain View group, that group has been going strong. They're going to meet at the Red Rock Coffee House like they have been every week.
Hey, can I say in advance of that Zach and Chris and I, and maybe you, and I don't know who's coming with us, we're going to California. We're going to Mountain View on January 15th to hang out with the Coursera people, and we should do a meetup.
We totally should.
Okay. Any others?
Yeah, well, Friday, of course, is Mandana's group that's been meeting at the New York Public Library's Central Park branch. She's been, or not Central Park, Grand Central branch, sorry. They've been doing a kind of routine series, and I know that's been a really great group. So, Mandana, thank you for organizing that, and their final meetup is going to be this Friday.
Okay.
And Ellen Dillon is getting the Ireland group together on Friday as well.
Ellen Dillon, that's great. Where in Ireland?
In Dublin, at Upstairs
Fantastic.
Books. No, Books Upstairs.
I wish I was going to that.
I know. So we had to make another field trip. And then there's a few next week as well. Goshen, Indiana, another one with the Berkeley group. One more regular webcast for us, and then final words.
Okay.
So if you have anything else to get on the calendar, write in that forum post that's pinned at the top, and please let me know, and we'll make sure that we can get the best turnout possible.
Thank you so much, Anna, for keeping track of all that. I just wanted to do a little show and tell. Chris Martin, this is a book by Ellen Keck, who is a longtime ModPo person. I believe she's in Sweden. I'm not sure about that. Denmark, maybe. And it's a book that she wrote about William Carlos Williams. It's about Europe and the tradition in the work of William Carlos Williams, and we're real proud of Ellen for publishing that book. Congratulations. I just wanted to shout out to Joyce Pope, Mama Pope, who sent us, or actually me, some of her meatballs in the mail. And I opened it up, and it was still frozen, so I brought it home, and I've been having meatballs every once in a while, and it's terrific. But then I found out, because she wrote a poem to me about tender meatballs. I found out in that poem that there's pork in the meatballs, so I'm getting a little retroactive pork feel, but love it. I love it. I just wanted to announce that Ray Maxwell and 4 colleagues from around the world have done a 4-part close reading of the Stein 100, the something feather something in the justice chair. Does anybody remember the title? No. Okay.
Stein 100.
Stein 100, and it's been added to the ModPo collaborative close reading, crowdsourced close reading page. So take a look at that. It's really very good. I just want to remind everybody that people are submitting essays this week, and if you haven't tried it, go click on writing assignments on the left side of any ModPo page and take a look. It's fun. You have 2 options this week, and it's basically a creative or uncreative exercise. One based on a Bernadette Mayer experiment, and the other based on the mesostomatic, which, thanks to Chris Martin and Chris Mostaza and Nikki Hoffman, upon whose little bot app it's based, created a really nice, robust one, and I hope you'll go in there and play, even if you don't write the essay. And those are due 9 a.m. on Sunday. As Anna said, we have 2 more webcasts. One next week, next Wednesday at 10 a.m. Philadelphia time, and then the Final Words webcast is on Monday, the last day of the course, November 23rd. It starts at 10:30 a.m. here at the Writers' House, and it's a party, so we invite everybody to get in their cars and in their planes and, I don't know, kites and things, and descend upon the Kelly Writers' House on Monday, November 23rd, 10:30, and after, I haven't talked about this, Anna, but afterwards we're going to have a party. We'll have a lunch party, a reception, so please come. The ModPo site will be open all year after November 23rd, all year. And there are lots of plans being hatched by various people to lead discussions. I will be leading the discussion of the poetry of Eileen Miles inside the ModPo site, right, Lily?
Yep.
So this is going to be exciting. Julia usually does something. Mandana is leading probably a second version of her Ashbury discussion group. So even in the off-season, ModPo will be somewhat lively, and we hope that you will check it out. If you have friends who want to join ModPo for the off-season to catch up or to try it out for the first time, they must enroll before November 23rd because we're closing enrollments down on November 23rd. Okay? Great. And of course, next year we'll be back, and we really are excited about that, and we want you to tell your friends and your family. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about aleatory poetry, which a lot of people find difficult or weird, and I just wanted to start by reading something that James Anthony wrote in the forums about getting used to this crap. And he was really generous comment about getting used to it. And I want anyone, I guess I'll ask Dave and Erica from the Hangouts to comment, and then anybody else in the room who wants to comment can give me the nod that they want to comment. Meantime, 215-573-9752 is the number, 215-573-9752. Here's James. James is talking to people, including Noeline, who is saying, I don't really get it. I don't know what I can do with this chance-based poetry that allegedly takes the poetic ego out. I don't know what to do. And here's what James wrote. I agree totally, Noeline. Either you get it or you don't. I must admit, says James, I had my doubts about Week 9 while I was listening to Al's audio introduction. I hope he meant that he had doubts before he listened to the introduction, but maybe he had doubts during the introduction. He continues, I could feel my battleship sinking. It's Veterans Day. His battleship was sinking. But it was pretty good. Actually, it was surprisingly good. I guess he means the intro. I'm just not convinced that the poems just happened without some sort of nudging from the poets. I like the conception ideas behind the poems. I guess he means the conceptions, the ideas behind the poems that we're looking at. For instance, dropping the torn shreds of paper or using a computer a program to generate the mesostic, etc. Very interesting indeed, 3 exclamation points. I think it does boil down to freedom of expression. I would like to invite first Dave and Erica, and then anyone, just to say something, even if it's mere cheerleading, about why people should try this. Not what's a benefit of doing this aleatory stuff? Why is it worth trying? Why is it worth tolerating and sticking with? Dave Poplar, you want to start?
Sure. The thing I like about this the most is the way it challenges us to approach things differently. Because if you look at more traditional poems like puzzles, and I think you can do that to a certain extent, you can look at an Emily Dickinson poem as a puzzle to solve, to decipher, to find meaning. With these poems, it's completely different. If there's a puzzle analogy involved, it may be in the construction of the poem, but it's not as if there's a meaning hidden within the text that you have to decipher. The meaning is there, so it's more about just sitting back and absorbing it. And to me, that's such a different approach, and it can apply to a different way of looking at the world too. But it challenges us to do things completely differently, and that's one of the things I really, really like about this.
And it's just always good for human beings to try to do something completely differently, right?
Always, always.
And why is that, Dave?
Well, just getting out of your comfort zone. It challenges you to learn. You know, you can only move so far when you're in the same path. But if you swerve a little bit, I don't know. I think a poet might have written something about that.
Yeah, a poet from the 19th century.
Yeah, I don't know.
So that's really cool, Eric. I want to turn to you, but I think I just want to add that this is a distant cousin to the change of focus for the reader in some earlier pieces we read. The silliest and jokiest of all the pieces we read in ModPo is the sonnet by John Peel Bishop that has is it an acrostic? Is that what we call that? An acrostic down the left side that says "fuck you, half-ass," and that is a trick and a joke. But what it does is it gets you to learn that you should look at a text differently. You should read a text differently, and that's basically the aleatory or chance-based poets are saying, I'm producing this work differently, but it doesn't mean that you should completely throw out the idea that the words can do something for you. The fact that I didn't entirely control what words got generated, does that mean just because the poet's ego is either less involved or not involved that a poem is not still a poem? Erica, your thoughts?
Last night at my office hours, I was kind of talking about this with Audra Crane.
Yeah,
and
I saw that.
To share a quote from Cage, and I can't remember where this quote is from that we both found to be helpful. So here's a quote from Cage on this kind of stuff. Most people who believe that I'm interested in chance don't realize that I use it as a discipline. They think I use it, I don't know, as a way of giving up making choices, but my choices consist in choosing what questions to ask. And the reason why I guess I'm thinking about this quote is because one of the things that's central for me in engaging with this work is the relationship between procedural writing and the idea of art as life, which was something that's important to both Cage and John Retallack.
Really well said. Does anybody here want to... I think we might have someone who's not using headphones getting a little echo there. Does anybody here in the room want to follow up on this question? Remember, the question was, what's a piece of advice people can have to get into this stuff, to get past what might seem a stumbling block? Jason?
Let's see. I didn't raise my hand out.
Oh, okay. No, that's
fine.
fine.
I will. But I had a thought. I think that
Just one.
well, two.
Don't tease him, Anna. It'll get him started.
Well, I think that also Cage is influenced by the I Ching, and there are certain... The I Ching comes from, you ask a question and then you basically throw these sticks, and the pattern that is randomly generated is the source of the answer to your question. And so I think for perhaps Cage, and another way of thinking about this is that there is no pure chance, but there is there are energies running throughout the world that determine where things fall. That is not a human power.
Oh, that's really cool. So basically what you're saying, at least at the end there, is that a human being sits down to write out words that she or he is thinking of or has organized as writing, during writing, and that is no more or less random than other things, other organizations that the world itself or nature suggests. This puts me in mind of something that Mary Barnes wrote, and I want to come back to that. But first I want to ask Lily and Max if you would name a poem on this week's syllabus that is probably the one you'd recommend that's most accessible, the one that you would recommend people do first. And I'm going to give Lily a second to think about it because she's giving me that expression. Max, what's the one this week that you think people should start with? Presumably it was the first one on the syllabus, because presumably we put a syllabus together where you get the first one, but maybe not. Max?
I would recommend starting with Osmond's Dropping Leaflets. I think the sort of the political conceit of it makes it very accessible. It's a very Bush years poem, right? It's like oh,
George W. Bush.
Yeah, George W. Bush. Yeah, well, I don't think people are that hard on the first Bush years, but
No, I was just trying to spell out the reference because, you know, we have a global community here,
sure.
And Bush is somewhat forgotten by some people.
He's still pretty notorious the world over, from what I understand. But yeah, I think that one is a good one to start with because the kind of the political stance of the poem makes it accessible. We can all kind of see this as a political act. So she cuts up, language from newspapers, media, and sort of scatters it on the ground and
Yes.
it up randomly. A bit like what Jason was just saying about the I Ching and throwing the sticks and that kind of randomness of throwing and tossing out. And this is also, she's also playing a little bit with the idea of dropping leaflets of propaganda.
Propaganda, right.
Also just like air warfare stuff too, just dropping, blanketing areas with.
Yes, and the experience of reading that poem, which is a scramble of post 9/11 propaganda, immediate post 9/11, because the poem was written, 2 weeks after 9/11, as I recall. The experience of dealing with all that language that was washing over us, it almost had a random feel in itself. The Secretary of Defense, who was notorious for speaking like a Gertrude Stein poem, right, about things we know and things we don't know and things that are knowable and unknowable. And so what Jenna is doing there is she's just simply foregrounding the confusion and chaos and the meaningless of language. So that is a good one to start with. Lily, have you thought of one you'd think people should start with?
Yeah, I think that Dropping Leaflets and Vocabulary for Peter and His Free More are really the only poems from this week I personally like. So I think they definitely seem like the most seem like they're doing the most work that's most interesting to me, I think. Because similarly to Dropping Leaflets, I think there's a real conceit behind Vocabulary for Peter and His Free More, and the idea, I think everyone's experienced loss, everyone has lost someone, and probably everyone has felt that the conventional standards of grief and mourning have been inadequate. I feel like, I don't think that's too presumptuous to say, so I think in that way that poem, even though it sounds really cacophonous and difficult to listen to, is actually like pretty accessible in terms of the idea of grieving in a different, more a way that's more sympathetic to how that person lived their life and how you experienced their life.
Mm-hmm. I think we should stick on that for a minute. I'll just put the phone number out again for people who call, because I'm looking at the discussion forum discussions and the Twitter feed, and I see that there's lots of people watching today. So somebody, let's see, how about Megan from North Carolina? Give us a call. Hey, Megan, 215-573-9752, 215-573-9752. What I'd like to do is ask some others to respond to Lily's, I think, absolutely correct statement that many people or most people find the traditional language or the conventions of using language to mourn or memorialize inadequate, to incommensurate with loss. And that's probably the strongest case for this kind of poetry. So I'd like to call on a couple of people. How about Molly and Angie and Mary? Would you each say something about, in response, why is what Jackson McClough is doing maybe an answer to the inadequacy that Lily described? So can we start with Angie? Angie, you okay with that?
I think it's a wonderful point about chance poetics, the way that you can use a procedure or some sort of distancing method to throw into relief the inadequacy of language.
Yeah.
To kind of point toward a space that there is no concept for, or there is no signifier that would be appropriate. I think it's absolutely right. I don't know what else to say. I think.
Yeah. If poetry is one of these media that allows us to make a presence out of an absence, and the absence is the thing to which we want language to point, but it's gone, it's kind of presumptuous for us to use a pointing denotative language to point to someone or something that is gone. And so everything gets free-floating when the thing to which we want to refer is lost. So I really like the way you frame that. Molly, any thoughts on how ModPo people encountering Week 9 can deal with, every one of us, is, alas, have suffered loss, and how does Jackson McClough help us find an alternative way of representing loss?
I'm not on board with Jackson McClough at this point, so I'm not sure if I want to really speak to that.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to you on another topic. Mary, your thoughts?
Well, I've been to, unfortunately, some pretty awful funerals where the person who is being memorialized, being remembered, the people closest to that person are too filled with grief to be able to speak. So the person who is speaking about the person and doing a kind of elegy about the person's life doesn't know the person very well.
Right.
And it comes across being incredibly
awful.
Awful,
Right.
yeah. Especially if you were a person who
Let's
knows.
go back over that. The person who should represent cannot, because she is in mourning.
They're devastated.
And cannot speak. And the only alternative is plain sentences, which typically the only person who can utter such plain sentences is the person who didn't know the deceased.
Exactly.
And Jackson McClough gives us some kind of middle space where the person who cannot articulate loss is able to use some method to produce, yeah?
Yes, and it's ephemeral too. What he produced was not only meaningful to the life of Peter Moore, because this he documented and tried to capture these happenings, these art happenings, but the actual event itself was ephemeral, just as life is ephemeral.
Yeah, very cool. We have someone on the phone, Anna Strong. Who is it?
We do. We have someone on the phone who wants to weigh in on this. It's our buddy Philip Drexler, calling from Texas.
Okay, great. Philip, hello?
Hey, Al. How you doing?
I'm fine. You want to talk about Jackson McClough?
Can I interrupt for one
Yeah, I
moment,
want to
please?
talk
Wait a
about
minute.
that
Julia wants to
particular
interrupt. Hold on. Here's Julia.
Philip, I just want to thank you for doing a Q&A with us for our teachers page. So everyone, if you go to our teachers page, you'll find a little Q&A with Philip, who's one of our teacher participants in ModPo.
Thank you, Philip, for doing that. Let's give Philip some snaps. Yeah. Philip, hold on before you ask your question about McClough. Jason, will you give Kevin Hatcher the microphone? Uh-oh. Jason, do you have the mic? That's Kevin right there. Kevin's got a mouthful of salad. Okay, get the get the camera on Kevin. Kevin is our liaison at Coursera in Mountain View, California. You guys still in Mountain View?
We are.
Yeah. So Kevin is a new friend of ours. He's working with us in ModPo, and I just wanted to introduce him. And I'm not sure why I gave you the mic, except it's kind of rude to introduce you and not give you the mic. Do you have anything to say?
No, I'm just incredibly excited to be here and to witness this. I think at Coursera we all see the value in what you're doing. I think it's unparalleled, and I think that it's a proof point that online learning and MOOCs can be interactive and engaging, and that there is space for humanities, particularly writing and poetry. And so very excited to be a part of it.
Did you get the Kool-Aid over across the street?
Did I get the Kool-Aid? Well, I have a humanities
ModPo Kool-Aid.
So although I work in tech, my first love is absolutely literature, and I used to want to pursue a PhD in French literature. It didn't pan out that way.
Hey!
But I still very much enjoy.
So can I reveal your secret?
You can reveal my secret.
Really? Seriously?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to give you 2 seconds to think about this before I reveal it.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So Kevin has a tattoo. We're not going to be able to see it. He has a tattoo, and it's Walt Whitman. Guy has a Whitman tattoo, and it comes via James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. And in Giovanni's Room, there's a great moment where he quotes Whitman. Give him back the mic so he can tell us what the quote is, because we won't be able to see this tattoo.
So the quote is from Leaves of Grass, and it is, "I am the man. I suffered. I was there."
And he did that. So Kevin is like, anyway, he's our partner, and let's give snaps to Kevin. Philip, you have, before you talk about Jackson McCloud, do you want to say something about ModPo to Kevin? Because he's already into it. But
well, I'll tell you, Kevin, if you read my Q&A that Angela just mentioned, you'll find that in my bio I say that my premier learning experience has been ModPo, as led by Professor Al Filreis. And I can also say to you, Kevin, I've done your marketing survey before with y'all, and even though I've had a couple of bumps along the way, you give by far the best service of all of the MOOC providers that are out there right now. And I'm not a flatterer, so this is the truth.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Kevin, for joining us today. It's great to see you. Okay, Philip, do you want to ask a quick question about the McClough? And then what we're going to do is we're going to answer. We're going to have you hang up and answer while you're listening, so that someone else can call. So go ahead.
Well, it's more of an observation, Al. You're talking about the inability of words to express grief, and it just so happens, that I lost my brother here a couple of months ago.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you, Al. And I've been to a couple of survivors groups the last couple of weeks, actually. And it's absolutely true. And, I sit there as a griever, but I also sit there with my little therapeutic cap on, too. I can't get rid of it. And so what I hear is, what I actually see is that when people come for the first time, they almost invariably pull out a picture or
sure, some representation,
or something of the person.
Yes.
They can't really talk. They just pass that around and say a minimal amount of things about them.
Yeah.
Then when they're able to talk a little bit more, they talk in very short clipped sentences, and they often kind of trail off at the end. They don't really end, which reminds quite a bit of another poem we went over earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And it's only after they have gotten those non-symbolic ways of expressing their grief out of the way, and they recognize that other people have had to do the same thing, that later on in the session, or maybe in the next session, then they're able to speak in articulate sentences and create a narrative and talk about the person.
Yes. Great.
So I think that a poem, like both of the poems that have dealt with this subject, are really good ways to get somebody into talking about the person and the loss.
That's great, Philip. That's fantastic. We're going to chat a little bit about that, and we'll hang up now. You'll be able to listen to us through the webcast. Thank you again for calling, and say hi to Austin for us.
All right.
We'll talk to you soon.
Well.
Okay, you bet, Philip. Thank you. 215-573-9752. Anybody want to respond? This is right on. Something about how, maybe we'll go back to Molly on this. Something about how inarticulateness is appropriate sometimes after loss, but also how this Chapter 9.2 method sometimes frees us from the subjective responsibility to have something to say, because emotionally we can't do it, so we use a device or a constraint that does it for us. Any thoughts on any of this, Molly?
I guess it almost feels to me like a way of avoiding trying to speak about it, which maybe is not the point, but I don't know, I guess the sort of stepping around trying to speak it directly just makes me yearn more for the ability to speak it directly.
But can we speak it directly?
To me, just thinking of Walt Whitman, look for me under your boot soles says more to me than vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore. So maybe that's a personal choice.
Yeah, more of a circle of life thing. Yes, can we get the mic to Eric? Jason, hello, Eric. How are you?
I'm great.
Good.
I want to just share a story of something that happened to me visiting a friend of mine funeral who'd passed away far, far too young, a wonderful woman who helped run many arts organizations here in Philadelphia. The Catholic Church is very stretched right now. There's not enough priests. Priests sometimes are asked to do 7 to 8 funerals a day. She had a funeral with 500-600 people who knew her very well, and a priest who knew her not at all, and who was under enormous time constraints. He went through the liturgy of her funeral at an extraordinary clip. And I saw people crying, not because they were moved, but because they were harmed by the kind of use of words, use of formula in such a distanced way. And I bit my lip, but at the end of the service, after walking out, I came back in, and I said to the priest, "Tell me, Father, do you know the difference between a funeral and a horse race?"
Oh, Eric, that was pretty rough.
And he said, "No," but I said it in the most charming, light-hearted way. Tell me, Father, do you know the difference between a funeral and a horse race?
No, that's not charming. That sounds like...
No, I don't.
Sounds
I said,
like
that's
sarcasm.
the bloody problem.
Yeah. Did he? What?
So, because I said it in such a light-hearted way, and he was so distanced, he didn't realize the bite of it at all.
Yeah.
So he said, "No, I don't," just expecting me to tell him the end of the joke. And the end of the joke was, that's the problem.
So it's a great anecdote, and it tells us, it sort of situates you. It puts you in a stance that's similar to mine. But we have to respond to the Molly O'Neills of the world who are saying, I long for a directness that doesn't avoid the loss. So does anybody want to respond to the whole question of avoidance in this?
Well,
Lily?
I think I lean actually more towards what Molly was saying, even though I originally suggested the Peter Innisfree Moore poem. But I think for me, there's so much need to make semantic sense in everyday life, whether you're grieving or not. So, and we can't always get the space where we would want to sort of be able to do some work that's productive, but maybe not in a conventional sense. We can't always we might not be able to find someone who wants to listen to us talk that way, or we just might not be able to find a space where we have permission to think that way. And so I think in some ways a poem like this can open up that space for us, even if Peter Innisfree Moore is not the person you lost or isn't directly part of the feeling you're feeling, but just gives you don't even really have to read through the whole thing that much and think about him specifically you can, but you could fill it with your own thoughts about your own thing.
That's so well said. Julia, I've always thought, and I might be wrong about the history of human language, but I've always thought that that formula and set piece language or ritual was a way for human beings to respond to loss that's just too painful, and that we've developed a very elaborate fiction that language is adequate, that some people call ritual, some people, I mean, religion obviously in the example that Eric used shows how religion gives solace or consolation by allowing us to map onto incomprehensible, inexpressible loss something easy and ready at hand. And I've always thought that the reason why I like modern and experimental poetry is that it is seeking not to diss ritual and the power of ritual, but is seeking alternative rituals that revisit the whole problem of what's incommensurate. I don't know. I'm rambling. Do you want to respond to this issue?
Yeah, I think there's something to when we think about how many cultures use not just ritual, but break it down a little bit, incantation and repetition and song to contain experience and provide a space and provide a cage. I think, of course, the word cage is really important to us in lots of ways this week. And this whole conversation is, I think, tying in really well to a discussion happening right now in the discussion forums that Mandana started, and we've got Robin Cohn and Terry Talty also participating in this. So Mandana asks, is it possible that we're hesitant around chance operations because we have discomfort around the innate chanciness of our own lives? So there's a way in which the form of these poems, which are enacting the chance we all experience, is hard. It's like emotionally hard, it's mentally hard to grapple with this, because what we're grappling with is chance itself, not just the poems themselves.
Yeah, and I think we've started this conversation way back when, I guess the first one was Let Us Describe by Gertrude Stein, where she is memorializing presumably friends who got in a car accident, and the poem reproduces the accident, and that's not what literature traditionally does. Literature traditionally is supposed to cover over that accidental quality to life, right? I mean, Milton's Lycidas, which is a great elegy, ends with consolation.
Right.
And, you know, the Lycidas I would like, and I'm sorry, John Milton fans out there, but the Lycidas that I would like would end more like the Amiri Baraka poem Incident, where we're so confused about this loss that we don't know who the subject is and who the object is, or where the pronouns work. My world, Molly, you know, my world is rocked. My world, pronouns don't make sense, cause and effect doesn't make sense. I want a language that's commensurate with that. I think that would be, it's not a response to your desire to have some kind of direct approach to loss, to avoid avoidance. But maybe it ends up being direct. We're going to play a minute or 10 seconds of Jackson McClow's People on stage.
Reinforced.
And what you're hearing is ritual. It does sound ritualistic. It's repetitive. It's like a meditation on the sound of a man's name. But most of all, it seems to attempt to reproduce the chaos, the sadness, the cacophony, the discordance, the disjunction of what happens when a friend is gone. And what it means to dislike this or hate it, I don't understand what that. I mean, there are haters of this kind of seemingly meaningless art, but this seems to me what people, human beings, have always done. It's like a howl of some kind. And the fact that it's collaborative and communal makes me think that it's the ultimate form of respect. If Eric's experience at the funeral is the perhaps ultimate form of unintended disrespect, doing this nonsensical mourning for Peter Innisfree-Moore through his name, maybe the oldest thing that people have done.
I think our caller wants to weigh in on this very thing.
Okay, great. Who's the caller?
It's Mama Pope.
I'm sorry?
It's Mama Pope.
Joyce Pope. Mama Pope, thank you for the meatballs.
And I'm sorry, last year you said you weren't kosher, and I didn't know this year.
No, I'm
that
not
you
kosher.
were.
I was kidding about the pork. Are you
Thank you.
Don't take that. I shouldn't have made a
No,
joke
it
about
didn't
the
hurt
pork.
my feelings because I still make marvelous meatballs regardless.
I'm not kosher, and I'm happy to have the pork and the meatballs. But I only learned about the pork from the poem you wrote.
Oh,
Kevin
yes,
Kevin is totally confused.
my secret ingredient.
Joyce Pope, who's on the phone from Northern California, she's made Tender Buttons is a Gertrude Stein poem we study, and she does tender meatballs. And she visited us from California last year to make her meatballs and spaghetti for the whole Writers House community. And then this year she mailed me some meatballs. By the way, don't try that at home.
That was a miracle.
It was a
total
miracle. Mama Pope, it was a miracle. It arrived. They were still frozen, and I've been eating them.
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
I know.
Joyce, do you want to say something? I mean,
Yes.
let's go from meatballs to death and loss.
Yeah. I want to talk about my experience, and of course, being 72, I've experienced a lot of loss and grieving. But just recently, I went to a young girl's funeral, or her service. She was 34 years old. She had some problems with addiction, but she passed away unexpectedly. And the minister, who said he had been a minister for 50 years, and by the way, Eric, I would have said the same thing to, I'm Catholic, I would have said that to the priest too, out of no disrespect. But this minister said that this was a celebration of her life, but he was so morbid and negative about this. He didn't say bad things about the girl, but instead of celebrating her life and commending her and how much she loved her job, how much she, loved little children, I didn't even like the approach. And because of that, I wasn't able to approach the parents who I know personally to show my condolences. And he kind of set the tone, and I left. I just left after he finished his last words. And of course, they played Amazing Grace, which is a song that my children have already been ordered never to play at my celebration of life.
Wow, you know what you want.
Well, you have to, because I don't want children to say, and there's 6 of them, and they say, I wonder what Mom would want. There is no doubt they know exactly what their mother wants.
I don't want to put you on the spot, so I won't. I won't ask this as a question. No, I don't want to. I won't ask this as a question. I'll just assert it with you on the phone, and you can respond if you want. It seems to me that one of the innovations of the Massive Open Online Course is that, let's just say, older participants. For a professor like me, I'm teaching 18 to 22-year-olds, and then graduate students, a little older than that or a lot older than that. But ModPo is my first full-on experience with elderly people, older people, encountering this weird stuff. And it seems to me that over the 4 years of ModPo, my sense is that the people who are least likely to be turned off by this experiment in 9.2 are the older people, partly because we foreground the elegy, partly because we foreground the idea of the chaos of life or the randomness of life. It would seem appropriate that some of our art have that randomness. Does this speak to your experience with this weird stuff? Because you seem to me, you've come on many times to say, hey, I'm just Joyce Pope, and all this stuff is, poetry is hard for me, and, does your age have anything to do with your openness and your receptiveness to this kind of weird stuff?
Yes, I would say that my age and my life experiences have opened me up. And actually, 9.2, the Mesophistics, is exactly correct. It is my most favorite. I haven't participated in writing, but I did do a Mesophistics for this last writing assignment. And I am fortunate that I can take my original poetry and pull it in. So a close read might not be as hard or difficult. But I don't know what it is, but I feel so free when I do it.
That's great. Thank you so much for calling. Thank you for the tender meatballs. Love you so much. Take care.
We love you all.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Take care. Fantastic. I just want to list a couple of the other poems that are happening this week and ask some people in the Google Hangouts just to comment on any of them, okay? So we have John Cage's attempt to write through the poem Howl. We also have Dropping Leaflets, Jenna Osmond's post 9/11 piece. We have Bernadette Mayer's writing experiments, which we should talk about because they're so great. We have Joan Retallack's Not a Cage. And that is, of course, Joan's taking the first and last lines of books she's about to discard. And I think I'll end there. I'm going to start with Erica Kaufman, because I know you know that Retallack piece pretty well, and I know you know Retallack's work and respect it. Do you want to say anything that will encourage people who haven't gotten to Not a Cage yet to, to drop everything and do it? What's so great about that, Erica?
I love this poem, and the reason why I love this poem is because it's an interesting way to memorialize a bookshelf.
Yeah,
So
memorialize a bookshelf.
She's taking lines from books that she's about to get rid of,
right?
And she doesn't necessarily want to get rid of the books, so she's holding on to a piece of them. And then the fact that there's a poem constructed out of all of these lines that I think is a pretty beautiful poem is surprising and exciting, and makes you think a lot about what the books that somebody has reflects back on that person.
And she was very much influenced by John Cage, and it happened accidentally that one of the books either began or ended with the phrase "not a cage."
Yeah.
And what do you say about that kind of accident?
I think it's the kind of accident that drives a lot of aleatory or procedural work, right? Because it's that kind of indeterminacy, to use a Cage term, that reminds you that the way that we move through the world is something that's just not predictable. Like, you need to be open to the fact that you can't predict what's going to happen at any minute.
Yeah. Thank you, Erica. We have a phone call, and I'm going to ask Julia and Angie to respond to, if you don't mind, to respond to the question. Who is it?
It's Marianne calling from New York.
Marianne?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Al, and all ModPoers.
How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for reading my my post last week. I hadn't only just listened to the webcast yesterday.
Wait, thank you for being what last week?
You read one of my posts on the.
Oh yeah. I did. That's right.
Yeah.
Oh, and did you see So you got to see it during you watched the recording.
Yeah.
Great.
I saw the recording.
That's great.
So I have. I'm not sure if this is a question or just an observation or something I'd like to hear other people weigh in on. So I used to perform and attend a lot of performances of music that kind of falls into this category of chants and aleatory music.
Yeah.
And my experience is that it can cause not just, like we saw with the language poets, I think, hopefully, that you can obtain an emotional response to something that doesn't make linear sense in a conventional way. But I think some of this work you can experience in the body, the discomfort, agitation, bewilderment, maybe ecstasy, and I wonder if that's like an added bonus or something that's intentional or something that any of these people are actually striving for when they make this work.
Such a great question, and particularly a good question in a week where at least one of these poems is a dance performance or a script for a dance performance. Julia and then Angie, let's. Do you want to react to Marianne?
Yeah, the first thing that popped in my mind as you were talking is that I feel like with music and performance we have sort of a different vocabulary to think about the medium in which we're expressing something, and we're not always as comfortable talking about the medium of poetry, but of course when we're doing any kind of improvisational work in dance or music or song, we're always thinking about the tools we're using, right, and how those tools allow us to express something or what those tools make possible. And so I think can be a super valuable way to read the poems, even if the poems don't seem to have an obvious performative component. I mean, obviously with one of the pieces on our syllabus for this week, we have a performance, but we can think about what is performative about any of the other pieces, I think.
Thank you. Angie, a response to this?
I was thinking of Anne Carson's essay, The Gender of Sound, in which she talks about women's sound forms. And I'm thinking about sound forms, embodied sound forms, as having a kind of feminist politics, and there being something like really exciting and sort of utopian about that. There's this moment in the Carson essay where she shares this anecdote of Hemingway on Stein. And Hemingway talks about his dislike for Stein because, quote, she had a laugh like a beefsteak. And I think there's this way in which the Hemingway comment points toward the discomfort that historically, I think men, particularly white men in positions of power, have felt toward women's sound forms. And there's this wonderful way in which something like chance poetics opens up a space for experimental poets and feminist poets to kind of like experiment with the effects of sound and sort of insisting on a poetics of the body that counters dominant structures of power. And that's sort of peripheral maybe to the original comment, but I guess it's just to say I think that something about like an embodied or visceral chance poetics has this potential to do that kind of subversive work of resistance, you know. And it's all about sound and sounds that you know can upset and make people feel uncomfortable. I think it's great.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It would be interesting to compare your comments there in the Carson work to Baraka's How You Sound to see how that's gendered, that discussion is gendered there. But Anna Strong wants to say something, Marianne, and then we'll go back to you, Marianne.
Well, I was just thinking about when I was reading through the forums on these discussions, there was one, someone had started a thread, I'm completely blanking on your name, I'm so sorry, but she started this thread about Peter Ennis, the vocabulary of Peter Ennis Read More, that said, it hurt my ears. Like I couldn't listen to it because it just hurt my ears, I had to turn it off. And of course, my first reaction is like, I'm sorry, like that's a bummer that it hurt. And obviously it's like cacophonous and like difficult to listen to.
Yeah.
But then again, I was thinking, you know what, that's actually kind of good. And I think we should embrace that essential level of discomfort. Because if it was like a sonically nice, pleasant thing to listen to, it wouldn't strike us with the same power that that elegy has. It's not like losing somebody is comfortable. It's not like that's nice. It's not like that makes us feel good. It makes us feel really, really terrible. And in a way, that kind of cacophony, like when it gives you that visceral reaction of like, ah, and that hurts, it kind of should.
Yeah. Well put. Marianne, any response to these responses?
They're great. I would just say let's all be subversive listeners.
Yeah, well put. Thank you so much for calling. It would be fantastic if you would make the trip down here, maybe for the Final Words webcast.
Great.
That would be really cool.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great day. Oh, it was Mary. I kept saying Marianne.
No.
Oh. Mary. Yes, Mary. Indeed. It's all kinds of Marys.
So many
There's so many Marys.
we're getting mixed up ourselves.
Yeah.
Like
so
Marys
Mary,
and Marks.
So Mary, what I want to do is I want to read you another Mary, this Mary Barnes, a response to this question of cacophony, and then ask you to respond to it.
Sure.
Okay. So this is directly related to what Anna was just talking about. Mary Barnes, 20 hours ago, or maybe about 24 hours ago now, wrote, I'm late coming to this thread. I too found the performance elegy very discordant. And yet, as I listened, an image emerged from the film Fahrenheit 451 in which Clarissa is memorizing a book. In fact, whoever joined the group or collective was memorizing a book. They became the books because in the society portrayed, books were banned. I suppose this was a memorial to the stories or a way of preserving the writing material. Vocabulary was McClo's way of memorializing more. It's what matters here. Then she says, I have sat on my deck. I'm glad she's not sitting on her deck. desk. I've sat on my deck listening to the cacophony around me, birds singing, the raucous cry of blue jays and crows, the hammering of shingles, the revving of a motor. I could go on, but these sounds are part of the human condition. I wonder, by creating such a chart, if McClough wasn't giving homage to Moore, that he was part of this wild chaos we call life. And this was my response. Isn't the raucous cry of the blue jays just as discordant? Yes, there is discordance in nature itself, of course. What the human mind has done in the past 5 or 6 or 2100 years, depending on your sense of history, is to organize this chaos by way of an art or conceptualizing that fictionally orders the chaos. The work we're talking about now permits the natural chaos to come through by attempting to take the fiction-making, ordering human ego a little bit or a lot out of the way. Mary, your comment on response to Mary Barnes?
Well, first of all, Mary Barnes has been such a wonderful person on the forums
Yes,
to
she
interact
has.
with.
Yeah.
I think that was so beautifully put to think about the chaos that's around us in terms of the sounds that we hear, not just from the street sounds, the sounds that we're hearing here in the Kelly Writer's house as trucks go by or as the building is being built next door, but also just natural sounds, birds, animal sounds, the sounds babies make are not ordered, organized sounds, but are beautiful nonetheless and are part of our ambient.
Such a great, that last example of babies crying, right? I mean, isn't that the classic instance of, like, if you're not that baby's parent or loved one, you think that's pretty annoying if you're on the plane or something, but then you realize it's the most beautiful sound. Lily, you look like you were about to say something.
Well, I think, like, actually, to take the example a little bit more precisely, maybe like birds or babies or whatever, like, their own actions are not discordant or unordered according to their own sense of logic. Like, right. Birds don't just sit on a branch and say whatever they want for no reason. They have really specific reasons. We just don't necessarily have access to that. So it's kind of in a similar way, like, hearing that apparently discordant sound is music. It's just discordant because it doesn't, and it sounds like very hippy dippy or whatever, but I do think about this a lot. It just isn't the way we know to think about sound. Right. So it's kind of about, like, hearing something discordant and trusting that there is something that organizes it. You just don't know what that thing is.
And we should say, as a matter of literary history, that poets like John Keats and Wallace Stevens, among many others, have sat by the casement, sat by the window, and listened to the bird's song and tried to figure out whether that's real or whether the transformation that poetry does of it is realer. And that's, we've been listening, poets have been listening to the birdsong forever. And Robert Grenier, who was sort of in ModPo Plus Chapter 9.1 last week, Robert Grenier has created a whole poetry out of listening to bird sound and reproducing it. Okay, so what I want to do is ask Julia Block to do whatever she wants with the forums and Twitter, just to catch us up a little bit, because we haven't done a lot of that. Just take it on your own, and then I want to get final words from everybody. Give everybody a chance to say one more thing. Yes, and we'll do that. Okay.
So
Julia, it's all yours.
Really quickly, so Victoria just posted in response to what you, Al, just said about older learners in ModPo, and she says one of the great things about this course is it brings learners from all different ages together, so thank you for that comment, Victoria. Terry Talty in the discussion forum for the webcast has pointed us to a really amazing discussion happening right now about the O'Hara essay. So Raham El Ashri wrote an essay about the poem Why I Am Not a Painter, and the peer reviews turned into discussion, which is what which is why we do the essays the way we do. So I want to recommend everyone to click on that thread because it's terrific. And then there are a couple of kind of questions that rhyme with each other. So CJ posted a question about the artist's objective and how to establish the nature of the subjectivity in some works. It's a really complex and kind of philosophical question on the forums. It's terrific. And James Ritter asks a related question about artistic expression. Now, we haven't talked a lot about authorial intent today, but that's kind of a question always hovering in the background here. Twitter's blowing up as usual. It's Shannon Ratcliffe and Colleen Knight.
You want to quote a few?
And Sophia Pandea writes, there is discordance in nature itself. Therese
Sophia,
Pope,
keep writing the poems. She's amazing. I've been following some of her poetry lately.
Therese Pope thanks us for the comparison to Fahrenheit 451 and Mac Low. People are posting a lot about grief and some of their own poems that deal with grief. T. de los Reyes, poetry should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. CJ is also on Twitter. Are accidents simply our meaning making faculty making meaning out of randomness? Terry Talty's on
Wait,
Twitter
do that
too.
again.
Okay, CJ's question, are accidents simply our meaning-making faculty making meaning out of randomness?
Yes. Hey, yes.
Right?
Answer is yes.
Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, so we're going to have final words from everybody. Say something about aleatory poetry or chance-based poetry. If you have something to say to recommend it to people, we would really love it for people who have fallen behind or who don't dare to do 9.2 because it's so weird. It is the weirdest of the chapters, whatever weird means. So let's go to let's go to folks in the Google Hangouts first. We'll do Angie, then Dave, then Erica, then Max, then Molly, and then we'll come here into the room. Angie, do you want to start? I didn't give you much time to prepare.
Sure. I've been thinking about how there's, well, I think that there's a potential politics and ethics to a kind of commitment to chance writing, to aleatory writing. And I think my perspective on this is very much informed by Joan Retallack's work. Someone for whom the negotiation of chance is always bound up with what she would call poethics. I think
say that word again so everybody can hear it.
Poethics. That's Joan Retallack's. That's Joan
Right.
Retallack's term, of course. But when you negotiate that threshold between sense and nonsense, and you kind of try to make meaning a greater sort of chaos, as some people have been suggesting. You're insisting on a kind of ethos. You're exercising a kind of politics, and I think that's something that's powerful. Is insisting on kind of residing at that threshold between sense and nonsense, or meaning and meaninglessness, and it's very. I think that kind of political or ethical stance is very much in a lot of the work that we were reading this week.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Angie. That was fantastic. Dave Poplar, final words?
Two quick things. I just wanted to mention Ray Maxwell tweeted something great when we were talking about vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore. He said, heard a quote of a Talmudic scholar who said 3 things follow intense suffering: silence, tears, and a song.
What was the last one?
And a song.
Psalm. Yeah.
Song.
Song, S-O-N-G.
And another thing real quickly, I really love, and I mention this a lot, an op-ed piece by Stanley Fish from 1999 in the New York Times about his critique of biography and the biographical narrative, and it's called Just Publish, Minutia Without Meaning, and he's very critical of the linearity and the predictability of biographies. And in one part he says, cause and effect took care of themselves when you knew before you began that the life you were narrating would end up illustrating a general truth familiar to everyone. But when general truths have been forsworn, the biographer is left with little more than a collection of random incidents, and the only truth being told is the truth of contingency, of events succeeding one another in a universe of accident and chance. The honest thing for a biographer to do in this situation would be to give up cause and effect and just go with contingency.
Yes. May our literature do some of that. I mean, it is, because we're studying it, but may more of it. Thank you, Dave. Erica Kaufman, final words?
Well, I was going to echo what Angie said so beautifully about Joan Retallack and her idea of poethics. And Retallack's book, The Poethical Wager, is one of the best books in the world, in my opinion, and I think that it helps us figure out different ways to approach the poems that are on the table for this week, because what Joan gives us is a way to think about chance operations not as a giving up of authorship, but more as as a way to engage with the unpredictability of one's own surroundings, which includes language and the way that language is always changing.
That's fantastic. Would you, Erica, be willing for next year or soon to help me add to ModPo Plus a curated small piece of the Poethical Wager?
I would be super excited to do that.
So if we can get a small piece, because we can't have a lot of people reading a lot of stuff, and then we can put together a little video discussion of it and add it to ModPo Plus. I think that would be great.
Let's definitely do that.
Right. Okay. The book is called The Poethical Wager, and the author, of course, is Joan Ritalik, who has work in ModPo main syllabus, and I believe also in ModPo Plus. I'm not absolutely sure of that. I think so. Max McKenna, final words.
Sure. Yeah, I think this week is like one of the stranger ones. I think I was just reminded of that this week. But it's because it's doing like contradictory things, I think, for us. And on one hand, it's this complete embrace of chance and of randomness and of kind of completely surrendering the poetic expression and the creative ego to like our machine overlords or whatever. Like that's kind of like the tone that lots of people get. And yet there's this absolute reemergence of like the poetic ego on the other end, where people are like, oh my God, I can't believe a machine said something so beautiful.
Right.
And so it kind of like, it's a weird way in which it sort of just sifts out some sort of remainder in a really compelling way. And so I think there's lots of people out there who will be turned off by it naturally, people who start at this point to really think that anything goes. But I think those people might be surprised to find how much it does come back down to these sorts of ideas of beauty and expression and stuff at the end of the day, even if it's not in a way that they expect. It's a little bit uncanny.
Yeah, so well put, Max. Thank you very much for that. Molly O'Neill, final thoughts?
Sure. I'm sort of caught up in the tension between agency and chance, and the TAs. We've been talking a little bit on the side today about how there's something at stake in the decision to embark upon a chance-based operation, and I'm just really interested in the interplay between that sense of openness and randomness and the decision to allow that, and the process by which the poet filters it to create new meaning. So.
Well stated. A great way to frame the problem. Mary Obrapta, final thoughts?
Well, we dwelled a lot about despair. And I want to go back to the other word that the caller mentioned, which was ecstasy. And I think there's a great deal of ecstasy in the process of the mesostic machinery, when you realize that it isn't just the machine, it's your choices too that have made something really beautiful.
That's really nice. I'm going to quote you. The best thing that I've seen this week in the forums was produced by you in a thread called "What to Enjoy when we try to enjoy the 9.2 poems." Oh, cool. Ron Silliman's here. We're going to get him in there. Ron, we're talking about aleatory poetry and chance-based poetry. We're going to put you on the spot in a few minutes to say one brief thing about it. You're a 9.1 poet. What the hell are you doing in 9.2? But here's what Mary wrote in response to these constraints. She decides, this is so cool, she decides that if we think about the intense constraints and the methodological constraints hard enough, we realize that the pleasure that we can derive from them is akin to rhyme, to the pleasure of rhyme. Here's what she says. I think it is like the pleasure of rhyme, but not tired like most rhymes in English have become in the last couple of 100 years. Something new and shining. And like the poems we've been reading, they resist one interpretation. You bring yourself and your own experiences to the poem. So the structure of constraint gives off the pleasure of that's like rhyme, and yet it's open rather than closed like so much rhyme is. That is to say, rhyme is so often closed. That was brilliant. Mary, you're brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you for joining us at the table today. Julia Block, final thoughts.
Yeah, I've been having a little side chat with Jeffrey London, who was writing on the discussion forum about dropping leaflets, which we began
Jenna
Webcast
Osman,
with.
yeah.
And I just love his description, how he writes, it's disjointed and it accumulates, and it's random, and there's a curatorial ego of the author. And so I think it's so important to think about how it's not an or and, it's not an and or equation, it's both. It's a
Yes.
both and the difficulty of the poetry and the challenge and the opportunity of so much of this poetry is being able to tolerate like both chance and seeming randomness and intent or craft. And we're going to come back to this question again before the end of the course.
Yeah, and also it's just so seemingly antisocial. We've been so socialized to want to know who wrote this and to see what's being written as a full-on view of the ego of the person who wrote it. And it's really hard to violate that. People do not like the thing, like this was generated by a machine. But what? No, it can't mean. It's no good. You know? Yeah.
And yet we made the machine. We made the rules the machine operates under. You know, we made choices. We made choices based on the materials we had available. So
yeah.
That's.
And then we have someone like Mary who sees the constraint as giving off the pleasure that's like rhyme. So it, and then we have this, my playing the ritualistic Jackson McClough performance piece, which sounded ever so much like cultures of human beings from thousands of years ago.
It sounds like the keening or the wailing or the singing you would hear in a different kind of memorial service.
So what's that? It's not new. It's old, I think. It's like chanting. It's very much like chanting. That's a pun maybe that Ron can speak to, because that's really what we're talking about here. Lily, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think I struggle with this week a lot too, in the spirit of being honest, I guess. It feels a little masculine to me, maybe. That turns me off a bit, but it just makes me think I need to hang out with Angie and Erica more, and definitely read the. Well, also just generally, I would love to hang out with Erica and Angie more, and read The Poetical Wager for sure. But I guess like I've just been thinking about the concept of writing through something, and it's definitely something I work with in other media, so maybe that'll be a key for me. Like currently, I listen to a podcast that's about bad movies. And I never watched the movie that they talk about, but I find the podcast much more interesting than the bad movie. So
theoretically, because you haven't watched the bad movies.
Yeah, but I've seen, like I can tell that the hour of the podcast is better than the 2.5 hours of the bad movie. So I'll work with that.
But you've only saved a percentage of that time.
Yeah, it's not about the saving time; it's about the enjoyment per minute or whatever. So maybe I'll work on that and I'll let everyone know how that goes. But I wanted to do a plug for book groups, since you mentioned Al at the beginning of the webcast. I'm the coordinator of book groups, and if you're ModPo people, you are very much invited and welcome to join our groups. And we have 3 really exciting month-long groups coming up, all led by ModPo folks. Julia is starting a group on Monday with the poetry of Douglas Kearney and Margaret Christakos, and that should be great. Al is doing a group in December and January with a break for the holidays, so we won't have to work over the holidays. No worries about that. Studying the poetry of Eileen Miles, who's coming as a fellow in March of this year to the Writers' House. And then Max
has a new selected poems, so we'll probably be looking mostly at those.
And Margaret Christakos will be at the Writers' House in February.
Oh, cool.
And Max and I are leading a group on Laureen Carey, who's a Penn professor and alumna herself, and a great writer. Her memoir called Black Ice, which is about being one of the first women and women of color to attend a prestigious boarding school in New Hampshire called St. Paul's School.
And then went to Penn.
So if you're interested in joining any of those groups or you just want more info, you could post in my office hours or just email whbook@writing.upenn.edu, and that goes to me, and I'll give you all the info.
Fantastic. All right, so let's, Jason, do you have the portable mic? Jason, final words, then we'll go to Eric and Ron and Anna, and then back to me finally.
Yeah, I think that that we've put a lot of emphasis on grief and chance accidents resulting in loss, but I think we also need to remember chance leading to accidents of meaning, or the chance meeting of 2 people who will go on to become lovers, or
Some trees.
Or the chance evolution of humans that has nobody selected the constraints behind what our very emergence. So I think that in looking at the chance poems, look for the moments that suddenly are meaningful to you, and reflect on how those moments came out of pure chance.
Very nice. Thank you, Jason. Eric, final thoughts?
So if you're in New York tomorrow at 7 o'clock at Dodge Hall at Columbia University, Bernadette Mayer will be reading and speaking. And
So tomorrow is Thursday in Dodge Hall at Columbia.
In room 501. Anybody want to send me in 2 or 3 questions to ask Bernadette? I will get them to her tomorrow, and I will record her answers and post them back.
Fantastic. Great. Ron Silliman, final thoughts, even though...
First and final.
First thoughts?
Right. This is talk about chance. One thing that immediately occurs to me after hearing this denial that intelligent design hasn't led us to Ted Cruz, that is to think about why the poets in the 50s and 60s in the US and France and elsewhere were interested in breaking up the idea of the ego writing the poem. Right. And I personally think that has an enormous amount to do with the U.S. conflict in Vietnam during that period, and with the suspicion of all sort of received categories of inherent in intention / goodness, which also turned out to be monstrous and lethal. Right. So I've always seen this kind of chance as begun in a critique of the self that was quite consistent with a lot of other things that were going on during those decades. That's not an accident, even if it was chance.
That's really great. I mean, if anybody's looking for a sort of summary historical view on a form of radicalism that gets the language in the 60s and 70s, you just heard like a 2-minute capsule of it. And I guess, you know, it could boil down to this, even boilier still. You know, if this is what intention wrought, maybe we should try non-intention for a while and see what happens. Anna, thank you, Ron, for stopping by. Anna Strong, final thoughts, and then me, and we'll wrap up.
I guess I've just been thinking a lot about what chance operations can teach us about teaching. Because I was having this conversation with my own students last night. They've been looking a lot at graffiti and street art, and they've actually this week have been reading a lot of the reactions against graffiti and the attempts to kind of make it a much more transgressive crime than perhaps it actually is.
Yeah.
And a lot of that discussion kind of boiled down last night to, like, we need to decenter this notion of a single artistic ego that, you know, comes from this, like, traditional notion of genius. Expression doesn't need to come from this, like, particular place of genius. It can just come from someone wanting to say something. Mm-hmm. And what was so great about that discussion is I just kind of noticed it happening is that they stopped, as we were discussing this, they stopped doing the whole raise their hand and wait for me to call on them thing. Mm-hmm. And it slowly kind of over time just accumulated into this snowball discussion where I was just sitting back and didn't have to say a damn thing.
Yeah.
And it was awesome.
Nice. You're a good teacher, Anna Strong. You really are. You've been doing a little teaching in the forums, I've noticed, too. So I just want to end with 2 shout-outs. One is to a gang of people in Los Angeles who got together, and they sent us they called together the voicemail line, 51295 ModPo, and I'm going to play that. And then I want to conclude by reading a message from Alejandro Duarte, who happens also to be in Los Angeles, who has not only given me permission to do this, to talk about his experience, but when I asked him, he said he really would appreciate it if I would share this. So I'm going to end with that. So here is the gang from Los Angeles.
Hi, Al. It's Paige Polsine in LA with our meetup group. Everybody say hi. Hi. We just had a great meetup in which we close read a poem written by our own James Ritter that was constructed through liberal exploration of the Mosaic.
I used the Mosaic and wrote through Carl Sandburg's Wilderness, and then applied my ego.
It's a meta poem. And we loved it. And then we also created our own poem, which we're going to share with you in the forum, using one of Bernadette Mayer's writing experiment options. So we are having a great time out here on November 7th in LA, and we miss you.
We should mention that Robert also read one of his poems, full of end rhyme and couplet, just to bring us back to the beginning.
You would have loved it, Al.
So that's
Anybody else?
they're saying goodbye.
We're having a great time.
That's
Thanks,
Paige
everybody.
Polsine and Jim Ritter and Robert Doherty and some others out in Los Angeles. And they seem to be having a good time with this experiment. And finally, Alejandro Duarte. Between first and ninth grade, I went to 9 different schools before being sent off to completely fail my primary and secondary education in Montevideo, Uruguay, South America. I was there for a year. I couldn't hack it, so I came back and dropped out of high school. As encouraged by some school administrator when I returned, because, quote-unquote, people like me, well, you know. And you can read about these experiences in a blog post, which, you know, maybe I'll post. There's a link to this blog post about that first part of his life. His college career, Alejandro says, consisted of 14 failed years at Orange Coast Community College, followed by 2 failed years at Saddleback Community College, where he struggled. He says, well, when I was in my early 30s, 32 maybe, I took an introductory college class at OCC. Turns out I've been conflating Spanish and English grammar my whole life. And the funny thing is, though Spanish is my first language, I really can't read it or write it anymore, and I speak English as if it were my first. Prior to this experience with this great teacher he had, John Buckley, at this community college, his English writing skills were probably equivalent to that of someone in the 4th or 5th grade. Everything I know today, the skills I developed, are largely self-taught, and in that arena, I've just been making shit up as I go, studying things scattershot, like a sawed-off shotgun, I guess. He missed the word shotgun. It's really fucking hard to learn this way. Add to that the fact that I have pretty severe ADD and had my first of 4 children when I was 19. So pursuing an education has always been secondary. Needless to say, I have struggled with education my entire life. ModPo is my first experience where I, as a student, feel so completely honored, valued, encouraged, validated, and respected. In fact, I almost feel as though my shortcomings here in ModPo are an asset. I have always dreamed of a pedagogy, I learned this term from you, built on discovery, conversation, and inclusivity. I've had dreams of learning centers like hacker spaces, like the Kelly Writers House, that are built around such methods that can altogether replace schools. We know enough about how children, people, societies flourish. My greatest wish has been for so long that these learning centers, spaces, houses, environments existed in every city for every student throughout the world. Just a small wish for my grandchildren. That's Alejandro Duarte, and Lily and I met him, as I mentioned, last week in Los Angeles, and he's been in communication with us and with the teachers, I know, and I have a scheduled phone call with Alejandro who wants to talk about inclusivity in ModPo and what ideas he has for it, and that is an invitation that we issue to anybody who's really into this course. It's an ever-expanding and evolving course, and it is a dream and an honor for me to be able to curate a learning community that includes someone like Alejandro, and it's a fantastic thing that he could possibly say that this is his first. It's a sad and fantastic thing, fantastic for ModPo and sad for American education, and I guess South American as well, that this is the first time he's felt honored, valued, encouraged, and validated. I'm honored to be in some weird way your teacher, Alejandro, and thank you for being part of the community. Mary, thank you for hanging out at the table. Julia, as always, you're great.
You are.
Thank you. No, we do this every week. No, you are.
Yeah.
And the director of our creative writing program at Penn, come take a look at it. It's pretty spectacular. Lily Applebaum, thank you so much.
Sure thing.
And we have Angie to say goodbye to. You were great today, Angie. You were on a roll. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. That was wonderful.
That was really good. Dave Poplar, love you, man. That's how we're supposed to say this, right? Love you, man. Just
Keep
plain
it
old
real.
love you. Just plain old love you. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Max McKenna, have a great day. Good to see you.
Good to
Molly
see you.
O'Neill, you're there. I think I see you there. You are, Molly. Thank
Here
you
I
so
am.
much.
Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Have a great day. Ron Silliman, thank you for stopping in. Eric, as always. Jason, you're the best. Anna had to leave. Adelaide, you're watching expertly. And Zach Gardner, who seems to have succeeded doing the sound. Zach Gardner has succeeded. You're on solo next week. I don't know how you're going to do this. Maybe Adelaide's going to help. And Chris Martin, thank you. As always, thanks everybody. Have a great time for the rest of week 9 and week 10. And week 10, what are you doing? Something funny?
Just
And week 10 is next week is week 10, the final week, and then final words webcast on Monday the 23rd, right here, the beginning of the week of American Thanksgiving. We'll be giving thanks to you. Take care. Have a good week.